Let's make some glass materials. So first, let's try to create this clear, shiny glass material here. So this is a nice photograph. You can see the features of glass pretty nicely here. So the most important thing for glass is the refraction. You can see that it lets the light through and it distorts the image behind it. So let's create a new array material and give it some refractions. Go to refract and make it almost clear. Let's try 220. Okay. So the index of refraction for glass is about 1.6 to 1.9. For basic glass like this, it should be about 1.6. So let's assign it to our object and render. So this is a good starting point, I think. One thing you will notice that our material looks a bit too bright. Look at these areas here. It looks a bit cloudy. So this is because we don't have the correct diffuse color. Look at this photograph. Try to find the darkest point of this glass material here. So something like this might work. Or here. It's a very, very dark gray. So find the darkest point of your glass photograph and try to set it up as your diffuse color. So I guess it would be something like this. Okay. We render. This already looks much better. So for most glass materials you want a very dark diffuse color, almost black. Okay, so another thing glass has is some nice reflections. They are pretty sharp and they are pretty strong. So go to reflect, increase the value, let's try 180. Okay, and enable Fresnel reflections. Glass has Fresnel reflections and the Fresnel IOR should be the same as the refraction IOR. So that's 1.6, the default value. This works just fine. And re-render. Okay, it looks much more realistic now. Let's look at our photograph again. Okay, here are some other examples. So for a perfectly smooth surface like this should work fine. Our material is basically ready. If you want to create something more like this or use it on larger objects, you should assign a slight noise map to the bump slot to simulate the slight imperfections in the surface of the glass. So I'm going to do that. Go to Maps, Bump, and try a noise map here. Let's try a smaller value for the size. Let's try 5. Render. Okay, I think the size should be fine. It's obviously much too strong. So I'm going to try it at 2. Okay. This should be fine. So one more thing for glass materials or any other transparent material. If you are not using caustics, you should enable Affect Shadows option in the refraction section. So this will make sure that light passes through the object and create some transparent shadows. It will not be too noticeable in this particular scene because the lights are very large and very diffused, and so the shadows are very soft. But still, this is something you should do for transparent materials. And one more thing to finish this up. we want to increase the max amount of reflections and refractions, just to make it more realistic. Let's try 12. And you will probably notice the changes in this region here. So I'm going to re-render it here. And it should have more detail now. Okay, this looks good. So that's our basic clear glass material. Okay, let's copy it. If you want to make a matte glass, you simply reduce the refraction glossiness, so 0.8. The matte glass appears matte because the surface has some very tiny imperfections. It is sandblasted or something like that. So the refractions and the reflections are both blurred. It would look a bit weird if the refractions were blurred and the refractions were perfectly sharp. So you would probably reduce the reflection glossiness as well. Okay, so that's a matte glass. Let's see how it looks. This will probably take much longer to render, because blurred refractions are the biggest render time increaser there is. So the more you blur the refractions, the longer it will take to render. So be careful with this. Use it only when necessary. So here's the rendering of a matte glass or frosted glass. Here's a sample of real photograph. It's a bit more blurry, but the effect is the same. To get a cleaner result with less noise, you would increase the subdips for the refraction and the subdips for the reflection. But this will make the render time even longer. Okay. So let's make some basic colored glass. So let's copy this basic glass material, rename it to glass green, and let's look at an example of green glass. So here's a green bottle. So everything else is probably the same as our regular glass material except for the color. So to change the color, you would usually use the fog color option in the refraction section. So go to fog color and change it to something green like this. Okay, let's see how this looks. So fog color is very nice in the aspect that it takes the thickness of the glass object into consideration. So if the glass object is thick and the color is more intense, where the glass gets thinner, the effect is less visible. So it works pretty much like in the real world. For example, look at this crystal here. The center is much darker than the sides, which are thinner. So the fog color is very nice for this effect. So let's compare it to our bottle. So it's probably not as strongly tinted as our example. So we can reduce the amount of fog by reducing the fog multiplier. Let's try 0.5. Okay, this looks closer. You can also see that this bottle has some stronger bump to it. The refractions and reflections are much more distorted than our materials, so let's try to increase the bump amount. Okay, looks nice. Maybe a bit too strong now. Let's try 4. I think this is fine. Just some slight imperfections to the surface. Okay, so that's a colored glass. You can change the color if you wish to anything you like. Here's an example of recycled glass. The color is more bluish. Let's try to change that. Something like this. Not as saturated. Okay, forgot to assign. Okay, so here you can see that the fog color is much too intense. Compare it to our reference image. Most parts are pretty clear except for the thickest parts. So let's try to make that happen. So first let's decrease the fog multiplier to 0.1. And it's much closer now. You can also increase the amount of contrast between the clear areas and fogged areas by using the fog bias option. So if you make it a negative value, the contrast between these areas is increased. Example, let's try minus 2. The fog also gets stronger and the effect is more contrasty. So if you reduce the fog bias, you will probably have to reduce the fog multiplier as well. Let's try 0.05. Okay, I think the bias is too strong now. Let's move it back to -1. Okay, so I guess this is pretty close to what we're looking for. So another example in this photograph is the noise in the bump slot. So this is probably some hand-blown glass, and it's pretty uneven, and you can see some larger imperfections and some smaller as well. So this is where we would probably try to use the fractal option of noise map. Let's try to change the noise from regular to fractal. Okay, you can see how it changes here. So this is fractal, this is regular. I'm going to make it larger so you can see better. So what the fractal does, it adds some smaller noise to the large noise. And you can set how many levels you want to add. I think 3 might be enough. Let's see how it looks. Okay, I think it's a bit too large. Let's reduce to 10. pretty nice. Let's make it even stronger. Let's try 6. So this makes the noise a bit more interesting. So this is a recycled glass material. Okay. Okay, so here's an example of clear glass and frosted glass combined into a single surface. So this effect is usually achieved by sandblasting the areas that are matte and leaving the clear areas intact. So basically we want to combine these two, the regular glass and the matte glass, into one material. We can do that by using V-Ray blend material. Let's set the clear material as base and matte material as coat and assign to our object. Now we can control the amount of matte glass on the surface by using a nice bitmap as our blend amount. So we'll try this flower image. Okay, so the black parts are the base material and the white parts are the coat material. This would make the black flowers to be clear and the rest to be matte. Okay, let's see how it looks on the object. Let's try larger tiling. Okay. Okay, so this would probably look better if the materials were changed around, so only the flowers are matte. You can do that in two ways, either by going to the output of blend amount bitmap and checking the invert box, or by swapping these materials around, whichever is easier for you. I'm probably gonna increase the tiling a bit more. Okay. So you can use any pattern you like or any image you have as the blend amount to get some different effects. Okay, let's make some more types of glass. So here's an example of black glass. This is very simple to make. Let's copy our clear glass material, rename to glass black, and simply reduce the refraction to, say, 5, so it's barely visible, almost not there at all. Make the diffuse darker. Let's try 1. Okay. Very simple black glass material. You can make the white glass in a similar way. Copy, rename to glass white. And this is one example where you would use a light color in the diffuse slot of a glass material. Let's try 200. Maybe make the refraction stronger, like this. So this is very foggy and not completely transparent glass. So that's a white glass material here. Here's another type of white glass. It's very beautiful opalescent glass. This is a bit more difficult to make, but we can create something very similar by simply, okay, let's make a copy first. So we can try using a colored refraction here. So here it looks like the refractions are blue. So we can try to set our refractions as blue. Maybe something like this. Okay, that's a bit too strong, I think. Just slightly bluish. Okay, maybe a bit lighter. You can see the yellow color here as well. The V-Ray calculates it automatically, and since we're using a colored refraction, it subtracts it from the diffuse color, and diffuse becomes yellow. Okay, I'm going to reduce the refractions a bit and maybe blur them to 0.8, okay, 0.9, and increase the subdues to get a nice smooth rendering. So this is an opalescent glass material. Notice the play between blue and yellow colors. Okay, so another common glass type is crystal. Even though it's called crystal, it's usually in just lead glass that has some strong dispersions and higher index of refraction than regular glass. So it's very commonly used on chandeliers, vases and stuff like that. So you can notice the very strong dispersion. And let's make the crystal material now. So copy the regular glass, change the index of refraction to 1.9. Okay. Change here as well. And enable dispersion. Dispersion usually takes longer time to render. And it also needs some increased subdues to get a nice correct result. So at least 12. Okay, so the crystals probably have some stronger dispersions. So to make the dispersion stronger, you use the AB value. The lower this number is, the stronger are the dispersions. So I think we might try something like 20. Okay. I will show you this example on another model. So here's a very simple crystal. I'm going to assign the crystal material. And try rendering. So you can see some pretty nice dispersion here. And that's a basic crystal material. This is something you would use on crystal chandeliers. Okay, let's make a colored version. So here's a pink crystal. The dispersions are a bit weaker and it's tinted in pink color. So let's copy it, rename to crystal pink. So we're going to use the fog color again to create the pink color. Okay, set it up like this. And also let's reduce the dispersions by increasing the ebb number to 50. Let's try it out. Okay, it's much too strong. Looks more like a ruby or something like that. So 0.2. Still too strong. 0.02. Now it looks a bit too weak. Let's bring it up to 0.05. Okay. Just a bit lower. Okay. Maybe let's also increase the refraction value to make it a bit lighter. And one more thing we can try for this material is changing the diffuse color to give it a slight reddish tint, like something here. Like this. Okay? Let's see how it looks. And here it is. You can make it a bit lighter if you wish by changing the fog multiplier lower. So the biggest drawback of the fog color is that you can only assign a color to this slot. You cannot use a texture, you cannot use a procedural map. So when you need a material that has multiple refraction colors in it, you will need to use the refraction color for it. I'm going to show you how that works. So here's our bottle, and let's say I want to make it colored with a gradient, for example, blue on the bottom and red on the top. So I'm going to modify this material now. And what I'm going to do is assign a gradient map to the refract slot. So go to the refract slot and assign a gradient here. Gradient ramp. Okay. Let's rotate it 90 degrees, like this. So I want the top red, like this, and I want the bottom blue. And let's change the middle point to something like purple. More to the right side. Okay, like this. And as you can see, this way you can have multiple colors in the refract slot. You can use images as well. For this material I would probably reduce the diffuse lightness to 1. So now the colors look more intense. Okay, so these are the basics for glass.